All right, I see folks trickling in to the webinar. Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan. I'm an event manager at Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live. Soon, I will drop a link in the chat for where you can order a copy of The Last Slave Ship, the true story of how Clotilda was found, her descendants, and an extraordinary reckoning, straight from PNP's website. You can ask our speakers a question this evening by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to everyone's questions, or as many as questions as we can towards the end of the program, but we apologize in advance if we aren't able to get to yours. Also, there are auto captions for this event by hitting the live caption button at the bottom of your screen. Let me introduce tonight's guest. Ben Raines is an award-winning environmental journalist, filmmaker, and charter captain. He lives with his wife in Fairhope, Alabama. Raines will be in conversation with Darron Patterson, a native of Plateau, Alabama, also known as Africatown. Darron is the great-great-grandson of Kupollee Allen, who was amongst the last load of Africans to be illegally enslaved and brought to America aboard Clotilda. He was the first African-American sports writer at the Mobile Press Register, a four-time Associated Press and Alabama Press Association award winner for Best Story of the Year, and was later feature writer and motorsports writer for the Detroit News. Darron was among the first African-Americans to cover NASCAR and Indy Car racing circuits for a major metropolitan daily newspaper, and served as communication specialist for the city of Detroit's resource management system for 3 years, before returning to Alabama as director of communications for the United States Sports Academy in Daphne. Also an award-winning technical writer, Darron was a senior tech writer for Roush Technical Services and is currently a senior technical writer for Airbus Defense and Space Division in Mobile. He serves on the board of directors of the Mobile Sports Hall of Fame, is the men's ministry co-leader at Mount Hebron Church Ministries, and is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. Let's give our guests a virtual round of applause.
Hello, Darron.
Good. Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. You know, a lot of people don't know that we're friends too, you know.
Right.
They need to know that. So it's good to see you, man.
Likewise, likewise.
Good to see you. How's things in the book world?
Really, really exciting. The book is selling. People seem to be responding to the story and the message in the book, or the messages of the book. So I couldn't be more pleased.
That's pretty cool. You know, the good thing about it, I get to interview you, Ben. I get to ask you questions because I've read the book. You know, I had the pleasure of reading the book. And the one thing I noticed about the book is that you didn't hold anything back. It was all about truth as far as I was concerned, which I wrote in the intro for the book. And I wonder, when you were writing this, what was going through your mind? You know, did you already have a mental picture, or did you just let the story go where it went?
You know, it was a real journey for me in a variety of ways, and some deeply personal. You know, I started it. I'd been an investigative reporter here in Mobile for 20 years. And the idea of writing about looking for the Clotilda had never occurred to me in those 20 years. I knew the story a little bit. I knew the last load of enslaved Africans had arrived in Mobile, but I didn't know all the intricacies, that it was a bet and that it was slave, you know, importing people had been outlawed already and all that. And so I started it because a friend of mine called me up. I started looking for the ship and said, hey, you should look for the Clotilda. You know, it's the last great American maritime mystery. And I told him that sounded crazy, like looking for pirate treasure. But we got off the phone and I typed Clotilda into Google, and I was instantly hooked and started digging into all the history. So what happened to me during the writing of this book was pretty profound. The experiences I had with folks in Africatown, and just sort of, I went from being a reporter trying to solve a mystery to understanding that this was a pivotal event for the African-American community, and that the Clotilda was an incredibly powerful thing. I didn't understand that when I started,
Mhm.
but it is sort of this totem of misery and stuff. But it's also, once I started learning the story, this symbol of an incredible power and resistance. And these people, they fought through incredible hardships and made a town and made a school and made a church against all odds. And that was, as I started to understand that, it really came into focus.
Yeah. It was really good for me growing up there and seeing people like you now become part of the community. Pretty much everybody in the community knows Ben Raines. Everybody knows who you are. Everybody understands the importance you played in this journey that we're on since the ship was found. And I don't know if a lot of people know, you had a pretty hard time too when you found the ship, or thought you had found the ship. Why don't you tell them about that?
Yeah. So the first ship I found was not the Clotilda. And I thought it was the right style of ship. It was the right age. And I wrote a newspaper article saying I may have found the Clotilda, and it went viral international, to the point where 2 days after that first story ran, the ambassador of Benin, which is the country everybody on the Clotilda came from, was on my boat in the Mobile-Tensaw Delta here in Mobile, going to the wreck site. And he was sent by the president of Benin to ask forgiveness from the souls who had been transported on the Clotilda.
Yeah.
So, the story was huge. It went viral. The Slave Wrecks Project and all these different groups came to check the ship and see if it was actually the Clotilda. That happened 3 months after I found it, after I reported this. And I remember so vividly this day. We were in Africatown. It was a huge community meeting, a couple hundred people there to hear what the archaeologists said about this ship. There were people wearing shirts that said, "Our ship has come in." The community, it had been 3 months. They believed the Clotilda had been found. When the archaeologists said it was too long to be the Clotilda, because we couldn't see the end, it was buried in the mud, people started crying in the room. And they went through a list of all the reasons it couldn't be Clotilda, and each one was kind of a dagger to my professional journalism heart, because I'd been an investigative reporter for so long and prided myself on almost never having corrections. And here, the biggest story I'd ever had, one that went literally global. My central premise was wrong. This ship was not the Clotilda. And it was a devastating moment hearing it all spelled out. And I stood there in that room, hearing people cry. People were saying, "You're lying," to the archaeologists, saying, "It is the Clotilda. You're trying to hide it from us." And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to slink away and lick my wounds. And I didn't find the Clotilda. And I walked out of the meeting at the end, and Thelma came up to me, Thelma Mabin, and she's a descendant. And
My classmate.
She gave me a big hug.
Yeah.
And while she was hugging me, she was holding me tight, wouldn't let me go. And she sang a gospel song in my ear. There's a bright side somewhere. And the lyrics are, "There's a bright side somewhere. Don't give up until you find it."
Yeah.
And she pushed me back and held me by the shoulders and said, "Don't quit looking, Ben. Don't give up. You're going to find it." And, I'm not, it felt almost like a mission from God at that moment. I just had this well of emotion, and I walked away from her, and these two men came up to me and told me they were marine archaeologists, and they told me the name of their company, and I recognized it because they had famously found a Dutch ship from the 1700s in the Gulf a few years before. And they told me they had looked for the Clotilda when they were doing some government work. And they told me, "We think you're on the right track. We've looked everywhere but where you think the ship is." And so I walked away from that meeting, and I decided, all right, I'm going to keep looking. I'm going to try and find this thing. And honest to goodness, we held up the first piece of the Clotilda to see the light of day in 160 years, 2 weeks later.
That's pretty cool.
The
one thing that journalists, and we know that writing a story that is not factual is one of the worst things that can ever happen to a journalist.
Yes,
it's one of the worst things that can ever happen. but
you can't let go of it.
You have to have some tough skin. Ben, you must have really, did some soul searching when you knew it was not the Clotilda. I couldn't even imagine. I've written things that I didn't have to retract it, but I wrote things that I had to go back and do more research on. And this is pretty much like you. So once this happened, what was your aha moment? You had to have an aha moment. What was the aha moment?
It happened in a library, and it was looking at archival documents, the old documents. Mm-hmm. Everybody who ever looked for the Clotilda, and a lot of people have looked for it, beginning immediately after the ship was brought in and burned and hidden in that swamp. The government started looking for it back then in 1860, and nobody was ever able to find it. Well, they were all following clues that Timothy Mayer, the Alabama steamboat captain who paid for the Clotilda's mission to Africa to bring back a load of enslaved people, mm-hmm. He did all these interviews. So the Clotilda, when it happened, it was famous immediately. There were newspaper articles written about it the day after the Clotilda arrived back in America. And they were published all around the country in newspapers saying that the Clotilda has arrived with a load of slaves. So it was a big deal because it had been outlawed for 50 years. So Mayer rode that publicity for the next 30 years until he died. He was interviewed over and over by, Harper's Magazine, by all kinds of publications. The New York Times wrote an obit when he died, calling him the last slaver. In every interview, he lied about where the ship was burned because he was still scared of getting prosecuted. He got arrested the week they got in with the ship. Right. And he got off because the judge was a good friend of his. In fact, he'd named a steamboat after him. But anyway, so I'm in the library and I'm reading Captain Foster's journal, right? So everybody else who has looked, including a man in Mobile who spent tens of thousands of dollars in between 2000 and 2010 looking for the ship, everybody was chasing these breadcrumbs Timothy Mayer left. He said, oh, it's in Bayou Connaught. Oh, it's in Bayou Combust. Oh, it's in Bayou Corn. He just named all these different places. Well, to a visiting journalist, you could be talking about Mozambique. The ship was hidden in a swamp here in Mobile that is 13 miles wide and 60 miles long. This is a forbidding and desolate place. Mm-hmm. So I read the captain's journal that sailed the ship to Africa, Captain Foster. And he says in there, I burned and scuttled my ship at 12 Mile Island. Well, I'm a river guide in the Delta, as you know. I take people on charters to show them the beautiful, incredible swamp and the diversity here, the wild places. Mm-hmm. And I knew all the places he was talking about, and a bunch of them were just too small, too shallow, too narrow to hide an ocean-going ship. They weren't deep enough. They weren't big enough. You couldn't get the ship there. So I knew he was lying. Mayer. And here was Foster saying 12 Mile Island. And I was like, oh, I know 12 Mile Island. You could definitely get this ship to 12 Mile Island and burn it. And then the next moment was an article I came across where Cujo Lewis was interviewed in, this is the man who is the subject of Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon. And probably the most extensive interview ever done with an enslaved person. Right. And Cujo says in this interview, in a newspaper interview in the 1890s, we burned the ship at 12 Mile Island. Well, that lit off a firecracker in my head because when he was enslaved, Cujo worked on Timothy Mayer's steamboats and he went up and down the rivers for 5 years. Mm-hmm. When he was 87 years old, I think, interviewed by Zora Neale Hurston, he listed 21 river landings along the Alabama River in order from memory. So I knew he knew the river. When he said 12 Mile Island, I knew that's where the ship was because he wouldn't have known it the night the ship was burned, but he ended up working the riverboat, like I mentioned, and one of the Kanko, who was one of the enslaved people from Africa, married one of Timothy Mayer's slaves, James Dennison, who was there the night the ship was burned. This guy was a Cherokee Indian who was enslaved by the Mayers, and they taught him to drive steamboats. And so he was there the night it was burned, and he and Cujo were friends for the rest of their lives. Wow. So I knew Cujo knew where the ship was. There's no question. James said to him, oh, it's at 12 Mile Island, because they would go by. The reason it's called 12 Mile Island, the northern tip of it is 12 miles from the Port of Mobile. So when riverboats coming downstream hit that island, they knew they were only 12 miles from the dock.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I want to talk about this later when we talk more about it. But you talk about Cujo's memory and the Yorubans that were, mostly they were Yorubans in the cargo hold. They were remarkable people. I mean, the more I found out about who they were, the more I was impressed with who I am, because I've had this thing in me for a long time that I always end up out front. And I never understood why. I never try to be out front. It's just always there. And then I read about my great-great-grandfather, who he was, a beekeeper, a woodworker, worked in a shipyard, did a whole bunch of things.
And a community leader.
Yes, he Osai Kibi, Cudjo Lewis were among the leaders of the community. And I used to always wonder, why am I, what is this about? Then I read about Pollee, Kupollee, and it all came clear. So my question to you now is this. This was not a secret. Clotilda was not a secret. And I'll get to that later too, about the secrecy behind Clotilda in the community. But it wasn't a secret. So how do you feel, Ben? How did you feel about, as you were writing this and you realized that this has been a very clever, and maybe not so clever, cover up for years that has gone on since then, on through all these administrations in Mobile, and the city has never done anything or lifted a finger to celebrate the lives of those people who were brought here and who survived and created a community for themselves. How do you feel about the city, about the community, about the people who have perpetrated this stuff for so long?
All right, well, so to unwrap that question, we got to start with Africatown. So the Africans who arrived on the Clotilda after they were emancipated, they gathered together again. The unique thing about the Clotilda is that the people on it were not sold through the normal market system because it was illegal. They were smuggled in. They were not, every enslaved person in America was listed in these slave rolls. They were known entities because they were property. And so these people couldn't be spread that way. They couldn't be sold that way for the most part. So they were divvied up between a handful of Timothy Mayer's friends and relatives, his two brothers and a couple of their, plantation owners they were friendly with. So because the Mayers owned all these steamboats and they put a bunch of the Africans working on the steamboats, the Africans traveled and were connected to each other. And so they knew each other. So after the emancipation, they come back together, the Africans, and they knew where each other was on these different plantations. They come together and decide, all right, let's try and make a stand together because we're stronger together than we are split apart. So they built this community when they realized they weren't going to get home to Africa, that was not going to happen. They started saving up money and they started buying plots of land from the people who had enslaved them. That began with them taking turns building each other's houses. Then they built themselves a church because they didn't want to go to school with the American-born blacks because they made fun of them because of their accents, their tattoos, their tribal scarifications. I mean, it's one of the ironies of the Clotilda story that American-born blacks ostracized them just like the white people did as other, So they built their own community, and that was a powerful thing to have done. By 1912, it was the fourth largest community in the United States governed by African Americans. It had prospered incredibly. By the 1950s, 60s, when you were a kid, it had 12,000 people. And you've talked to me about this. There were movie theaters, there were stores, there were pharmacists, butcher shops, restaurants. It was a thriving community with all businesses. Self-contained, absolutely, right. Self-contained. The city of Mobile set about, in the state of Alabama, set about destroying Africatown because of its proximity to the river. Africatown was sitting right on the Mobile River, right next to the state docks. So the Mayer family, because the Africans had bought the land from the Mayers and some other local plantation owners, they had purchased pieces of these larger plantations. Well, then these people, going into the 20s to the 50s, 1920s to 1950s, that had inherited these plantations from their ancestors who brought the Clotilda captives in, started leasing and selling the land to major industry. surrounding Africatown with the largest paper mill in the world. And there was another paper mill too. Imagine a community with 2 paper mills. That's horrific. And this went on and on and on, with them adding more and more industries, asphalt factories, oil storage tank farms, electroplating facilities. These are the most polluting industries in American. If you look at the environmental history of America, these are the most polluting industries, and they were all packed into Africatown. So this is classic environmental racism. The city leaders, the state leaders in Alabama, one of the most notoriously racist states in the country, said, oh, well, that's just a bunch of black folks in Africatown. Let's pack the industry all there because it's right by the river. And so they decided to make a giant highway and a giant bridge to facilitate the movement of 18-wheelers from the state docks, the state port, and all these factories, and to make a hazardous cargo route for 18-wheelers to avoid going through the center of downtown Mobile. Instead, they sent them through the center of downtown Africatown. So they built from a 2-lane road, they turned it into a 6-lane highway. And they destroyed every one of the cabins, the houses built by the Africans that they took turns building each other. This happened in 1992. This didn't happen in, pre-segregation. This happened in 1992. Yep. They built this giant highway. They destroyed Africatown on purpose. They destroyed the business district of Africatown. You go there today, there are 2,000 people, down from 12,000, and there are no businesses. And it's because of these active actions by these people. You described to me when you came back to Mobile, and Darron grew up in Africatown, but left at the end of high school. His family moved to Texas, and he didn't come back for decades. And he described to me being stunned at what had happened. One other pivotal thing happened. The Mayer family, the family that paid for the voyage to bring the Africans back and enslaved all these people, had built 500 houses in Africatown beginning in the 1880s that they rented out to people. And in 1968, I think, Augustine Mayer, the grandson of Timothy Mayer, the steamboat guy that started this whole thing, gave a newspaper interview where he said he was going to destroy all 500 of the houses they had built because the city of Mobile had given water and sewer service to Africatown. So they destroyed the houses in protest of that, saying, and he was quoted in a newspaper saying, well, they've got along fine in Africatown without running water all these years. They don't need it. They've lived perfectly happy, healthy lives. If you give him a bathtub, he wouldn't know what to do with it. He would store food in it. He literally said that in a newspaper in 1968. And they destroyed all 500 houses. Well, that's how many thousand people is that? If a typical family has 2 or 3 kids, that coupled with the highway and all, those were death blows for Africatown. And you talked about being stunned when you came back. So how do you feel about what happened to the town you grew up in, which was this idyllic place?
Well, let me tell you this, I'm so glad, rarely do I get to sit and hear somebody tell my story. Okay. And I'm just, it's like I'm riding the passenger seat. I'm like, oh, okay, you drive, Ben. Yeah. Just so everyone out there, the story that Ben just told you is a big part of my life. Yes, I was gone after they closed Brooklyn, which was another travesty. They closed Brooklyn, and that was one of the largest employers. Might have been the largest.
Air Force Base.
Yeah, Air Force Base. They closed it, moved a lot of people out. A lot of people who lived in Africatown worked at Brooklyn. They either worked at Brooklyn or the paper mill. And it changed Mobile. And so when I would come back, for Thanksgiving visits or Christmas or something, watching and seeing what happened in Africatown, it just wasn't, you had to be there when I was growing up. Ben talked about International Paper Company. We would hang our clothes on the line to dry because they got that fresh smell. But when International Paper Company started spewing stuff into the air, we had to rush out and get them off the line before the brown spots from the discharge got on the clothes, and they had to be washed again. And
this happened every day. This is
every day.
About fallout from the largest paper mill in the world landing on Africatown.
Every day. And we learned to live with this, We learned to live with it. We knew when we can go out. My mama, she knew when to do this. All the people knew when to wash, but we would rush out and get the clothes. And International Paper Company, in their infinite wisdom, they gave us a car wash a free car wash to wash our cars, to get for my parents to wash their cars and get the brown spots off it and that type of thing. Now,
but no, wait a minute. The reason that they gave the car wash was
yes,
because the fallout from the paper mill would keep the paint off the car.
Absolutely. And that's why they put the car wash there, to get it off. Yeah, that was, you were right about that. There were cars. Oh, it was brutal what happened. It was really brutal what they did to the community. But you know what? Through it all, we loved that place. We loved it, despite of the smell from the meat packing company, Hayes Davis, despite the stench from the paper mill. And this goes back to those 110 people in that cargo hold. The more you tried to discourage us, break our will, just, you know, I mean, it goes back to the 60s. I mean, civil rights movement, freedom riders, the Everest brothers, you know, assassinations of King, all this stuff. For years, people in this country who are hell-bent on taking us back to where we were. Remember, Black people were never meant to be anything but slaves. That's the only reason we were brought here, to serve, to help produce cotton and sugar down in South America, so that the well-to-do white people could have fine clothes and sugar in their coffee and tea. That's all we were ever meant to be. There never was a plan B. Oops. So now what we have to do is live together. We have to find a way. And I'm not trying to get too far ahead here, Ben, but you know, this is near and dear to me, what I'm about to say. The airbrushing of history is ridiculous. Trying to cover up our history by saying, oh, we don't want to teach that in schools because it will make the little white kids hate themselves. No, it's going to make them hate you. It's going to make them hate your family. And it's going to make them hate the family that they were born into, that were slavers and that were racist. And that's what it's going to make them hate. Let these kids hear history. Let them make up their own minds. Let them understand this is a great teachable moment. This is what America was. This is not what it should have been. Not what it should have been. Africatown, the only time we left there was to go and pay utility bills. We had everything. We didn't need to go anywhere. And the school that they built, Mobile County Training School, that they built in 1880 to teach the young Africans. Remember, there were Africans in Plateau area when the Clotilda descendants, Clotilda got there. They had been there for years through 2 or 3 generations of slavery. You know, Atlantic slave trade went on for God knows how long, changed the lives of 12 million people. 12 million people changed their lives totally. So when the Africans from Clotilda got there, and they talked funny that like this for and the people, they made fun of them. So what they did was they built their own school. They said, we're going to build our own school. We're going to teach the young Africans what to do. And when I went to that school, even back when I was there in the 60s, it was all about where you're going, not where you came from. I know this, I may be going, you know, long on this, Ben, but this is, you know, bear with me a minute. What Ben was telling you in the story that I now know, I knew nothing about when I was young, because they didn't tell me who I was. My family didn't tell me. A few families told their young people who they were. I wasn't one of those because they didn't tell me. And now I find out. I used to think, well, maybe it's because they didn't want us to care about where we came from, only where we were going. Or maybe they were trying to protect us. I know now they were trying to protect us because what Ben said, importing a load of Africans for the purpose of slavery had been outlawed for 50 years, and the penalty was death. I think they hung the captain of the Erie. He was the only one I think they actually found and hung. But they were concerned that people were going to be running around talking about Clotilda. And there were people who didn't want to hear that and didn't want other people to hear it. My wife says I'd have been the first person that they got and shot because I'd have been running around talking about Clotilda, Clotilda, Clotilda.
Let me interject here for a moment. This story Darron is talking about was a pivotal moment for me doing the book, because he told me, Darron is the president of the Clotilda Descendants Association. He told me that he didn't know he was a descendant, even though he grew up in Africatown, the town started by the Clotilda people. He didn't know he was a descendant until he was 60 years old, because his mother didn't want him to know she was the descendant. And
denied she was African. Yeah.
Because she wanted to protect him from the association, because even in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in Africatown, people would still make fun of the people associated with the Africans in some measure. And she wanted him to think where he was going forward. So he tells me this, that his mother had denied it. Darron's aunt, his great aunt, Aunt Eva, was born. She was one of the last children born to the Africans.
Sweet lady.
And his mother told him, oh, Aunt Eva's crazy. She's not African and neither are you. And this was a woman whose father was one of the Clotilda captives. And she lived into the 1990s. So Darron knew her all his life. Yeah. And it was only after she died that he learned she was telling the truth and he was a descendant of the Clotilda. So right here in Darron, we have the story being hidden from the descendants by their very families to protect them from the larger community. Amen. White and black.
Amen.
That's incredible.
And I can't really fault them, Ben. I wish I had known growing up, but I can't really fault them. I mean, they always
Alabama in the 1950s and 60s, you do anything you could to protect your kids from more racism. If something could subject you to more racism, your mother, I understand what she was doing. And
my cousin John Bako, they told him everything, and he told him everything. I mean, there's people in the community who knew, like very few, but man, I just wish I had known. Just tell me, so I always knew. I said that the place was something special. Okay, if you talk to Anderson Flynn, who is the president of Mobile County Training School Alumni Association, he said to him it's normal. It was a normal thing. The way we were living in Africatown, it was normal. It wasn't anything special. Everybody has a different take on it. For me, I knew something was up, Ben. I knew something was up. This was a different kind of place. Everybody. Everybody knew it. You talking about being raised by a village? Mama Thelma, who was a midwife, who pretty much delivered everybody. She delivered me. And Mama Thelma had a thing where she would pretty much name you whatever she wanted to name you, And I have two legal first names because my mother wanted me to be named Darrell, and Mama Thelma thought, I'm gonna name him Darron. Well, I went by Darrell until I was 18, had to register for the draft. And then I found out that I had two legal first names on file at the Board of Health. What is up with that, man? Mama Thelma, I used to really think that Mama Thelma used to hit the sauce a little bit, but I don't have any, anything validated to that. But anyway, Mama Thelma I was talking to her daughter the other day, Mona, and she said, yeah, Mama Thelma was the kind of person who would see a kid out there and she would say, hey, boy, you better stop that because you're not even paid for it. Your mama hasn't even paid me for you yet. And that's the kind of community we were in. Everybody raised us, man. And it was no talking back to anybody. They all raised us, and it made it really something beautiful, man.
Well, and that gets at the spirit of the Africans. They created this community. Yeah. And it goes back to, these people, slavery, it had been illegal to import people into America since 1808 when Thomas Jefferson was president. And this happened, in 1860. So 52 years later, the people that came aboard the Clotilda had been free and they had grown up. They knew how to conduct business. They owned property. They were farmers. They were craftsmen. When they arrived in this country after the end of the war, the end of the Civil War, they arrived before that, obviously, when they were freed, they were sort of a model for other African Americans because they actually taught the slavers
how to produce a better cotton crop, how to do things better. They were remarkable people. remarkable people. And I always say to this day, if Timothy Mayer was here, he would say, boy, I really made a mistake. I should have left those people alone because they were a whole lot smarter than I thought they were. And he had sold that bill of goods. He had sold that to people here so they wouldn't be afraid. And all of a sudden people say, well, I saw them doing this and they only saw it done one time. And, you know, you said they were dumb. What's up with that? Yeah. Yeah. It was.
So, you know, that's sort of the you know, we learned so much about what came over from Africa into our culture from the people on the Clotilda. You know, that's one of the fascinating things to me about the whole story, because we've always heard, oh, you know, the blues came from Africa, this or that came from Africa. Right. But with the Clotilda people, because they were captured so late and were so young when they were captured, the most of them were teenagers. You know, yeah, they were between 12 and 25 years old for the most part. Yeah. They lived for a long time into the 1900s. And so they were interviewed multiple times. So we heard their whole story from birth going forward. And that is that's what's so pivotal about the Clotilda. You know, it is the origin story of African Americans, the diaspora. We know everything about those people on the Clotilda. We know what lives they had before they were captured, because, you know, 9 of them survived into 1910 and were interviewed by Emma Roush, who wrote the first book about Africatown and the Clotilda. This was a Mobile Society woman. Yeah. Who had she'd gone to art school in New York, and her parents owned one of the biggest, you know, a big business in town, a funeral home that actually employed a number of the Africans, which is how she met them as gravediggers. Right. And so they worked for her dad, who was a Confederate war hero. And this woman interviews them and captures their story. And we learned so much about the experience of enslavement and the Middle Passage, everything from these people, because by the time of the Civil War, there were very few people alive who had been through the Middle Passage, because it had been outlawed for over 50 years, the bringing people in. So these people experienced that. They experienced African slaving raids where they watched their family members killed, you know, this murderous tribe in Africa that enslaved about a third of all the people who were sold into slavery. But we got to hear what their lives were like in Africa, how they were from these communities that were very sophisticated with businesses and different cultures and all this stuff. And we know who captured them. We know when they were captured. We know the villages they came from, the cultures they came from, many of which are totally gone. We know how much they were sold for, who sold them, who bought them, the ship they came on. And then, as we've been talking about, we know what happened to them when they got here. Yeah, that's the best. And so it's the whole story of slavery writ large. You keep talking about the school. The school the Africans started, because the white people wouldn't build them one, and they didn't want their children to be uneducated, was the first school for African Americans in South Alabama, period. Right. And so people started moving to be near Africatown so their kids could go to school. And that progressed. You know, the school kept getting burned down. I don't know if you know this, in the early years. Oh, yeah. Yes, it got burned down multiple times. Yeah. And you know, one of the last times they went, and Booker T. Washington with the Rosenwald, the Sears Foundation, gave them a grant to build a new school. And you know, Booker T. Washington and the Rosenwald of Sears built 5,000 schools in the South.
You may want to tell them about the Rosenwald.
The Rosenwald Foundation, which was this man Rosenwald was the CEO of Sears back in at 1900. Okay. And he heard Booker T. Washington speak and was just totally captivated and said, all right, my mission. He was one of the richest people on earth at the time. And so he dedicated his fortune to Booker T. Washington to build schools for African Americans in the South. And we're talking about, late 1800s through, I think they went to about 1920 building these schools. They built 5,000 schools in the South. There's only one left, still educating kids today. And it's the Mobile County Training School, the school in Africatown. Absolutely. And that name, Mobile County Training School in Alabama, back in the old days, that was code for a high school for Black kids. That's why it's called the training school.
But when you walk the halls of Mobile County Training School, you knew something was special. When you saw Mr. Alfred July, an English teacher, all 6'6" of him, when he walked like a gazelle. and he taught young men how to shake a man's hand, and he taught young men how to treat young ladies. And when you saw Miss Belina McCants, who's still alive, you immediately stood up straight because she was serious about where she wanted you to go. When you saw Thomas Neal, the math teacher, when you saw Miss Eugenia Rankin, one of the greatest voices you will ever hear, who is also still with us today and still sings as well as she did back then. These are the things that make it special.
You were wearing coat and tie at school, right?
Absolutely. We wore uniforms, man, and loved it. We wore uniforms starched. The girls had starched blue skirts and white tops and little ties, and the guys had white shirts with ties. We loved it. It was not anything that we felt we had to. It wasn't a forced thing. You know, we actually loved doing that. And it was a funny story because, some of the guys, we would always put rocks in a milk carton and play football at lunchtime. And we would come in after lunch with our clothes all raggedy. And in the 7th grade, and Mr. Neal, the math teacher, he said, "Look at you little boys." He said, "The girls are not gonna like you looking like this. Look at you, your clothes are torn up." And so me and a few of my friends, Arthur Barnes and Levy Knox, who's a prominent bishop in town now, we would go home that night and we ironed our pants and shined our shoes, and we came and we were even sharper than we had been. And we put rocks in a milk carton at lunchtime and played football all over again. It was crazy, but it was what we did. And it was just a love of the place, man. If we could recreate the mentality that the Arthur Barnes and the Darron Pattersons and Thelma Mavens have and had in Africatown, man, this would be a great world. But we can't do it, Ben, unless people decide that the BS that's going on has to stop. What are you doing with these bomb threats at HBCUs on the 1st of February? What is that about? When are the white people who know it's time to stop this going to jump up and say, "Hey, look, stop this crap. This is old 1950s, 60s. Stop it. Cut it out." We have to live together, Ben. If we don't find a way to live together, we're going to destroy this place even faster than it's trying to destroy its own self. Okay? We have got to figure out a way that we can live harmoniously together. And that comes from respect.
That brings up the whole idea of reconciliation.
Absolutely.
And that was when I went to
Absolutely.
Benin as part of this story. Benin, everyone in Benin was either capturing people, the Dahomeyans, this tribe there, they were either capturing people, and Benin is a country the size of Alabama or Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And they were either capturing people, or everybody else in Benin were among tribes being captured. So they have these resentments today based on slavery, 150 years ago. And they're worried there about their country descending into civil war like Rwanda did, which was tribal resentments. It was so fascinating to see, while we're talking reparations and those things here, they're having those same discussions over there. It just blew me away. And, the president of Benin right now, he's a Fan, a member of the tribe that was capturing everyone. He was attacked in the last presidential election for having slave dealers in his family tree. This guy is a multimillionaire from cotton.
I remember I remember when
on both sides of the ocean.
I remember when the foreign minister,
we've got to let Morgan
from Benin. When the minister from Benin came here, I'm gonna say this and get it done. And you took him up and he poured out a perfectly good bottle of rum. This guy is pouring out. I'm like, what is this dude doing, man? But that was his way of apologizing and the ritual.
He's the global leader of voodoo, which is from Benin.
Yes,
I mentioned things coming from Africa. Black eyed peas came from Benin, where all the Clotilda pastors, and okra. Guess what the word for okra is in Benin? Gumbo. Gumbo came here from Benin. I mean, that's the cross-pollination is just amazing.
I think it's great. I think Morgan wants us.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you all have a lot of audience questions, of course.
Mhm.
So Sonia Preston says, my family is also from Mobile. This question is for both of you. Have any of the mayor/foster descendants ever tried to make amends? And what amends or reparations do you think would be appropriate for the city and other people of Mobile to make?
Let me take this first, and then
I'm
you.
gonna say,
you're
Ben,
gonna
why
have
don't you
a
go
long
first? Because I got something to say about that.
I know
Okay.
you do. I know.
All right.
So
All right.
during my reporting of this story, one member of the Mayer family would talk to me, period, but only off the record. And he tried to be helpful, but adamantly refused to have anything to do with people from Africatown, because he claimed he had grown up with death threats associated with his family being associated with this stuff. And this guy, he just died. He was in his 80s. But when I wrote an article before the book was published saying, this is what, I found this ship, all that stuff. And it was after it was confirmed it was the Clotilda. This man wrote me, he's an Air Force Vietnam veteran, retired in Montana. And he wrote and said, I've learned that first he said, I'm sorry you didn't find the ship the first time. And he said, I am a descendant of Captain William Foster. I'm so ashamed and sad that a relative of mine had a role in this. And Foster is the guy who sailed the ship to Africa. And so we talked, and he said he really wanted to do something. Was there anything he could do? And I said, yes, the Mayer family will not talk to anybody in Africatown. They have refused any meeting. Will you come meet with them? They want to have a reconciliation. They want to, and he was very hesitant, but agreed. And he came, and he was in my truck. I picked him up at his hotel to bring him to this meeting where he was going to meet with descendants for the first time. He had taken his wedding ring off and told me he wasn't going to admit that he had a wife and daughters, because he was afraid somebody might want to do something to him for what his ancestor had done. But he came and he met with them. He describes it now as one of the most powerful experiences of his life, and that he was so overwhelmed with the love coming to him from Africatown, and for being brave enough to be the first person to come and do this. Fantastic. The Mayer family, as I mentioned, have totally refused to engage as far as with anyone in Africatown. One of them, I have learned through sources, threatened to cut me in half with a sword for writing about this incident at all, because it was embarrassing the family.
Yeah.
So Darron, I hand it to you.
The family's embarrassing themselves. The Mayer family has a golden opportunity to be at the forefront of something that could be world changing. A family coming together with the story this well documented, saying, look, what can we do? Okay, what can we do? Brian Stevenson, he of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, said, nothing will change until there's truth and reconciliation. The truth is, Clotilda is real. The story of Clotilda is real. The 110 people in that cargo hold were real. The inhumanity of the Atlantic slave trade was real. Now, what do we do? Everybody talks about reparations. I don't know how it would work, but we're working on it. Believe me, we're working on it. One of our descendants, Mr. Jeremy Ellis, is a major proponent, and he is going to be doing some things soon that I think is going to be very interesting for people to see. But what do you do? What they can do is show some interest in the community. They recently sold a building to the city for $50,000. That was the old Scott Paper Company credit union building. The building wasn't worth a damn. The building would have cost more to tear down, to renovate, than it was to tear down. Now we find out that the building can't be used. And for the city to get up there and talk about the mayor of Mobile to say what a great thing this is, that the mayors sold us this building for $50,000.
And the mayors wouldn't participate in this press conference. They refused to come. They just said, hey, we've got this decaying building. Let's get the mayor of Mobile to buy it, and we can say it was a gift.
We have to get the city and everyone on board. The International African American Museum is about to open in Charleston, South Carolina, a beautiful facility. One of the major people leading the effort to have this project come to fruition is Mayor Joe Riley, the longtime mayor of Charleston, a white man who had been the mayor for 40 years. And he is at the forefront of this thing. It's time out for all this black-white stuff. This is real, this is history, this is American history, and so goes Africatown, so goes Mobile. So goes Africatown. People are about to come here in droves. You can't step off the curb in Montgomery now without getting hit by a tour bus for what Brian Stevenson has done. And the city of Montgomery has embraced its slave history. What is wrong with these people trying to keep it the way it was? It is not the way it was. It will never be the way it was. And we've got to keep going forward in order for everybody to live together. Sorry.
That's okay. That's going to lead us. There are a couple of questions in here asking about the preservation of Africatown and the history of Clotilda. So are there any museums or if there's any projects going on to preserve?
What you see in Africatown now is not what you're going to see in 2 or 3 years. The Heritage House Museum will be open this spring. It's a major effort led, and I have to mention her name, Commissioner Merceria Ludgood. She has been a godsend to Africatown because she recognizes, County Commissioner Merceria Ludgood, she recognizes all the things that have happened in this town, and she's been here a long time too, and knows it. And now she's using what she can in her authority as a county commissioner to right so many of these wrongs that have happened. Yeah.
You know, the rubber meets the road right here at this spot.
I understand.
Miss Ludgood is doing great work.
Yes.
As the county.
Yes.
The problem is the city of Mobile.
We understand that. I was just talking about Merceria.
No, what I'm just saying, the city of Mobile is totally falling down on the job.
Correct.
They should be embracing the Clotilda history and turning it into, you know, Mobile has the potential, if we could get the ship dug up out of the mud where it's been since I found it 3 years ago.
It can be brought up. You know, people say it can be. Yeah.
Put it on display in a museum in Africatown. It will instantly become a global destination. It will be the anchor of the Civil Rights Trail that winds all through Alabama and Georgia with all these significant places like the 16th Street church bombing, the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
This is what we're saying, Ben. Commissioner Ludgood can't do it by herself. That's what I'm saying. Well, she is our godsend, but it can't be done by herself. We talked about this dog and pony show that was the Scott Paper Company building. You know,
but we don't need to talk about that crappy building. What needs to happen in Africatown, the ship needs to be dug up and put on display in a world-class, multi-million-dollar museum. Right now, the Smithsonian and the government of France are building 2 museums in Benin, $25 million a piece. One of the poorest countries on earth where people live on less than $1 a day.
It takes leadership, Ben.
Well,
what I'm saying about the dog and pony show, what I'm pointing out about the dog and pony show is the absolute atrocity that's happening, that the city of Mobile will not get behind this thing.
I 100% agree.
That's my whole point, that they will not get behind it. They have to. That was my whole point about Joe Riley, Mayor Riley. I mean, people of Savannah has embraced its slave history, and the people are flocking to Savannah by the droves in millions every year to see what that city is about. Beautiful place. Charleston, the same thing. We can be just like that, Ben, if not better. We can.
Well, the Clotilda in a museum in Africatown.
Yes.
It would be the national monument to the enslaved.
But the biggest thing, Ben, the biggest thing is that we need to make sure that the ship doesn't overshadow the legacy of the 110 people in that cargo hold. I think sometimes we talk too much about the ship and not enough about who those people were. We need to start getting their individual stories out as who they were.
That's the museum. We know everything about the people on the Clotilda, right? from cradle to grave, basically, more than any other enslaved people in the history of the United States. So in the museum, the ship and their stories, they are the proxy for everybody who was enslaved in the United States. For all the families who only know their ancestors came here in the hold of a boat, chained up, the Clotilda tells them what happened to their ancestors. That's why I'm saying it should be the national monument to the enslaved, and we tell the stories of the people on the ship.
I have to, Ben, I hear you and I understand where you're coming from. I guess I'm partial to the people in the cargo hold.
Well, absolutely. That's what the museum.
People in the cargo hold is the story.
Absolutely.
Africatown had people there before these people got here. That is the story. And that's what we have to make the focal point of where we're going. I would like to see Africatown, the slave quarters right there by Union Baptist. I would like to see them restored to the period, kind of like Old Town in Montgomery. Restored to the period so people can get an idea about how these people lived, how they lived when they were there, the things they did when they were there, the things that they accomplished that led to people like me still being here and being able to be viable, being able to be proud of who I am. The people in that cargo hold is the story, Ben.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Ship was the vessel, but the people in the cargo hold was the story.
And the museum is the ship and the story, the life stories of the people who were on it, because they are representatives of the millions of people enslaved in the United States. That's why that's my vision. And we've talked about this many times, and people don't know that, but we both think there should be a giant museum in Africatown.
And 30-foot high African mass facing east and west, sitting right on top of Goompa's property there by the chimney, which is going to happen, by the way. Sorry, Morgan.
Oh, no problem. Well, we're very close on time, but before we go, folks in the chat want to know how can they get more information about supporting Africatown and the Heritage House?
I'm glad you asked that. Let me put in the chat to everyone how you can see the Clotilda story on our website. It's theclotildastory.com. Pretty simple. And once you go there, you'll be able to scroll through and you'll see all of our partners listed at the top. Mobile County Training School, Chess, Move, Ramsey Sprague's organization there. Ramsey is I forget Ramsey, the name of it right this minute, but Ramsey is a zoning guru. He is the person that is really watching what they're trying to do to Africatown. Yep. He and Joe Womack.
He brought up zoning.
Yeah.
We would be remiss if we didn't say this. The Mayer family, which still owns all the property in Africatown those houses were on, there are entire city blocks in Africatown that are just grown up in trees and weeds because they tore the houses down in 1968. Lately, the Mayer family has been rezoning those properties to heavy industrial, the heaviest class of industrial properties in Africatown, trying to bring more industry in on top of the community, even as it's trying to bring out this history and celebrate it. So they're trying to squash this historic community. The same family that enslaved these people is still doing the same sort of stuff to them today through zoning. And I mean, it's just amazing.
It's a travesty. It's a travesty, but I guarantee you, we're on the right track. This train has left the station and it's not coming back. It's gone. And they better understand that now is the time for you to get on board with this thing, because it's rolling. It's rolling and it can't be stopped. And that includes the city of Mobile, state of Alabama, whomever, the Mayer family, whomever decides that they still want to do what they want to do, you're going to get left, man, because this thing is rolling. I mean, it's rolling fast.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Ben, thank you for joining this event with us. And Darron, thank you for joining him, especially as a descendant. it looks like, I think it looks like you should be able to see Darron's messages in the chat. The clotildastory.com is where you can find more information.
Spelled correct the
Also,
second time.
yes.
Yeah.
Read the book, The Last Slave
Yes,
Ship.
that was just what I was about to
Thanks,
say.
Darron.
Also, what's in the chat is the link to The Last Slave Ship, which you can purchase through Politics and Prose's website, in our stores as well. Your patronage is what allows us to do these events. And we would also like to thank the audience for being here with us and also participating in the questions. Thank you so much. And everyone, please enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having us, Morgan. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, Morgan.
Take care, y'all.